The year was 1720. A thin mist hung over the forbidden city, like a silken veil. Deep inside its winding corridors, a girl walked in silence, her feet encased in embroidered slippers that made no sound on the polished stone. She was 15. Her name, once sung by her mother in lullabies, no longer mattered. Today she would become one of the emperor's concubines. The walls around her shimmered in imperial yellow, a color forbidden to all but the Son of Heaven. The scent of jasmine and ancient stone filled her lungs. Ahead of her, an old eunuch led the way, his back bent, his pace slow, his shadow twitching in the flickering candlelight. He stopped suddenly. Turning toward her, his eyes met hers, eyes that had seen too many girls like her walk this same path. His voice was a whisper, barely louder than the distant trickle of water from the palace fountains. Listen carefully, child. These are not customs. They are not traditions. They are the rules you must follow, if you wish to survive. Her heart pounded. The weight of centuries pressed down on her. She had imagined the harem as a place of luxury, silk robes, golden hairpins, perhaps even love. But what lay ahead was something else entirely, something far stranger, far darker. Rule 1. Never turn your back on the emperor. The eunuch explained the first rule. It seemed simple, never turn your back to the emperor. But in practice, it meant you had to move like a dancer, always facing him, even when you undressed, even when you reached for something behind you, even when he touched you. You became a creature of sideways glances and careful pivots. Turning your back, even for a second, was an invitation for suspicion. Why? Because to an emperor ruling over 300 million people, trust was a fantasy. Assassins didn't wear armor. Sometimes they wore silk robes and soft smiles. A concubine's hand could hide a poisoned pin. Her hair could conceal a blade. A turned back was a risk, a window for death. The girl learned from watching others. One, named Min, had survived 3 years in the harem. She moved like water, her body graceful, her eyes locked on the emperor's face at all times. Even as she slipped out of her robes, even when she bowed, her spine never faced him. She had turned fear into elegance. Rule 2. You are no longer I. The second rule crushed the spirit more than the body. You could no longer refer to yourself as I, not in front of the emperor, not in private, not even in your thoughts. I became this lowly concubine, or this unworthy slave. Your name was erased, your selfhood reduced. Over time, many women lost the ability to even think of themselves in the first person. Their thoughts began to fracture. Identity became a luxury they couldn't afford. You were no longer a person, you were a function. The emperor didn't make love to women. He made love to objects, to bodies, to silence. Rule 3. You must not look into his eyes. And then came the rule that made her tremble the most. During intimacy, you were forbidden from looking into the emperor's eyes. You could gaze below his chin, at his chest, at the floor, but never directly into his eyes, because eyes reveal too much. Eye contact might remind him that you were human, that you had fear or pain or hope. It might remind you that he was human too, lonely, insecure, desperate to control the one thing he couldn't, time. And if your eyes met, you must drop to your knees, press your face to the cold floor, and beg forgiveness, not for disrespect, but for daring to think yourself his equal. Do it twice and you wouldn't be punished with death. You'd be sent to the eunuch quarters instead, to spend your days scrubbing floors, a living warning to all the others. That night, the girl was given a silk robe, embroidered with phoenixes and chrysanthemums. She was taught to walk in slow circles, to never speak unless spoken to keep her eyes low and her thoughts even lower. She wasn't just entering a palace. She was stepping into a performance where the price of forgetting a single line was her life. And as she stood before the emperor's door, lit by a dozen trembling candles, she realized the strangest truth of all. To survive here, she would have to forget how to be human and learn how to become a shadow. Her voice, once playful and full of song, grew soft, then quieter, until eventually it disappeared altogether. She stopped humming while combing her hair. She stopped whispering her thoughts before sleep. She stopped asking questions, even in her mind. She wasn't the only one. Others, too, moved through the palace like ghosts, women who no longer spoke, not out of discipline, but because they had forgotten how. Even in solitude, they mouthed words, but made no sound. One concubine, known only as Miss Orchid, hadn't spoken in 6 years. Even the eunuchs whispered that her voice had been swallowed by the silence. Rule of the sacred climax. But the silence wasn't the only rule that twisted the mind. There was another: the emperor must always climax last. Not for chivalry, not for romance, but because his seed was sacred, his release a moment when cosmic balance was restored. If a concubine reached her peak before him, it wasn't seen as pleasure, it was seen as defiance. So the girl learned to suppress herself, to hold back tears of pain and pleasure, to regulate her own biology like a soldier standing guard. Others taught her the tricks. Bite your tongue when you feel your body betray you. Picture your grandmother's funeral. Recite Confucian poetry, line by line, until the moment passes. One concubine, Lady Wren, became legendary for reciting multiplication tables during intercourse, not for education, but to keep from climaxing too soon. Stillness after the storm. But even when the act ended, the performance did not. The girl knew not to move. The sixth rule was merciless. You must remain in position after the emperor finishes, until he gives you leave. Sometimes that meant minutes, sometimes hours. She once knelt for nearly an entire night. The emperor already gone, her back aching, knees numb, sweat drying on her skin. But she didn't move. Not until a eunuch entered at dawn and nodded. Only then could she rise. Only then could she breathe freely. The rules were clear. If you even suspected pregnancy, you had to report it. Immediately. Not to the emperor, but to the chief eunuch. If you reported it falsely, you'd be beaten until your skin bore permanent scars. So she did what they all did. She waited, watched her body like a clock, counted days, tracked appetite and nausea, afraid of her own biology. She whispered with older concubines. Some swore by pear seed tea, others by keeping a pearl under the tongue. None knew what worked. The cage of motherhood. When her pregnancy was confirmed, celebration was brief. She was moved immediately, taken from her quarters and isolated, not for comfort, not for rest, but for control. Guards watched her every step. Her food was tested, her bath supervised. She was no longer a girl, nor a lover. She was a container. Not loved, not protected, just monitored. If she cried at night, no one came. If she laughed, it was noted. Every shift in mood, every bite of food was logged, not for her sake, but for the child she carried. Not her child, his heir. Her womb belonged to the empire. The theater of many. Eventually, the emperor summoned her again, but this time, she was not alone. 2 other concubines stood beside her. They exchanged tense glances, but said nothing. The ritual began. The favored one led, performing with grace, her movements flawless. The girl and the third concubine assisted, posed, and participated. There was no choice. Even friendship had limits here. Even sisterhood bowed to performance. Later that night, back in her quarters, the girl wept silently. Not because she had shared the emperor, but because she had held the hand of a woman she once loved like a sister, while watching her be humiliated. The mirror of power. By now, she had mastered the art of existing and disappearing at once. She smiled when expected, lowered her gaze with perfect timing. She slept with perfume behind her ears and rouge on her cheeks, just in case she was summoned in the middle of the night. She had become what the palace demanded: a mirror, a silence, a shadow. The gift arrived in silence. A carved sandalwood box, lined in crimson silk, was left at the foot of her bed. Inside, a pair of hairpins, gold filigrees shaped like phoenix wings, encrusted with tiny pearls. To most, it looked like a favor, a treasure, a sign that she was rising in status. But she knew better. In the harem, a gift was never just a gift. That night, she stood before her vanity, holding one of the pins in her hand, heart thudding. Should she wear it? Would it seem presumptuous? Would not wearing it seem ungrateful? 1,000 thoughts raced. Accepting the gift meant entering a silent contract. She owed him something now, more than her body, her smile, her loyalty, her staged affection. But refusing? That would be treason cloaked in pride. She chose to wear the hairpin, and the next morning she woke to glares from the other concubines. One whispered that she'd heard the emperor praised her. Another muttered that she'd always been lucky, not talented. By noon, her robe had been accidentally stained with ink by a palace maid. She thought of her friend, Gia. They'd arrived in the harem the same month, studied poetry together, shared snacks in the corner garden when no one was watching. But now, Gia's eyes had changed. Not cruel, but distant. Like the warmth had been peeled away layer by layer. And how could it not? In the harem, friendship was a weakness, love was a threat, trust was a liability. Even the emperor's affections became weapons. One woman's good fortune meant another's fall. One day, they were brushing each other's hair. The next, one was summoned while the other was left to rot in the cold quarters. She missed the way Gia used to laugh with her mouth open. Now Gia only smiled with her lips. Then came a new rule to learn. You must sense the emperor's mood before he speaks. If he was annoyed, you must become invisible. If he was melancholic, offer a soft smile. If he was triumphant, you must mirror joy. Never more, never less. You were to be a mood, a fragrance, a perfectly tuned string. One wrong note, and you could be snapped in half. The emperor never said what he wanted. He expected you to know. Some concubines became masters at this game. They studied him like a sacred text, watching every twitch of his brow, the way his fingers touched the rim of his teacup. The girl practiced each day. She memorized his rhythms like poetry. But it came at a cost. Her own emotions began to disappear. Was she sad? Angry? She no longer knew. She only knew how he felt. And then, perhaps the most paradoxical rule of all, remember everything, forget everything. She had to recall the exact inflection of his voice, what pleased him, how he preferred his robes folded afterward. But when she walked out the door, she had to act as if none of it had happened. No sharing, no journals, no reflections, just silence. The girl created a system. In her mind, she placed each memory in an invisible drawer. She could open it when needed, but otherwise it remained locked. One concubine told her she used smells, clove oil for happy memories, camphor for shame. Another tied knots in her bed sheets, undoing them when the memory had served its purpose. Over time, this game of memory became dangerous. One girl, Mayun, stopped remembering anything at all. Her eyes were always vacant, her speech slow, like her mind floated in a fog. They said she once laughed during a solemn ritual. The emperor ordered her sent to the far northern annex, a place where voices were never heard again. It was stained, half burned, but still legible. Each night I whisper what I must remember to the moon, then I swallow it with tea. The emperor thinks I am forgetful. I am not, I am hiding. It was signed simply, Lady Hua. The name rang faintly from her training lessons, a favorite of an earlier emperor who vanished from the records after one final act of disrespect. The girl kissed the parchment and hid it in her sleeve. She would remember Lady Hua's name, even if no one else did. Them passed. With it came new rituals. During the spring festival, the concubines were expected to dress like blooming flowers, gowns embroidered with butterflies, perfumes scented with peach blossoms. They danced barefoot across polished marble, smiling like deities, their bodies shaped to mimic fertility and joy. In winter, their gowns were dark blue and gold, cold but radiant. They were warmth personified, meant to pull the emperor from seasonal melancholy. During wartime, they wore crimson and black, their expressions fierce, their movements sharp, martial, controlled. She became a shapeshifter, an actress, a symbol, no longer a girl, not quite a woman, just an idea molded to the moment. One night, as she prepared to meet the emperor again, she noticed something strange. The silk screen in his chamber moved, slightly, as if someone behind it had shifted. Later, the eunuch confirmed it. Some encounters were observed, not for pleasure, but to ensure the rules were followed. Whether she was being watched or not, she had to behave as if she were, always. This was the heart of control. Not constant surveillance, but the belief that it might be constant. She realized she could never relax, never collapse into real feeling, never sigh without wondering who heard. Even her most intimate moments were performances in a theater, where the stage, inside, a sapphire necklace. She stared at it with dread. Everyone in the harem knew. Gifts from the emperor were never freely given. They were currency, bait, shackles made of gold and polished jade. A eunuch explained softly, "You are favored. His Majesty wishes your family to be informed." Her hands trembled. It had been months since she'd heard their names spoken aloud. The emperor never just took women, he took their worlds. When a girl entered the harem, her family became collateral. Their fortunes, honor, even their lives, now tethered to her behavior behind silk doors. One misstep, a wrong word, a look too long, a refusal to smile, and punishment wouldn't fall on her alone. It would fall on her father's title, her mother's health, her brother's marriage prospects. One concubine named Sulin had once spoken in jest, nothing more than a soft comment about the emperor's hairline. 2 days later, her uncle was stripped of his position. 4 days later, she was gone. The girl never joked again. Time moved like honey, slowly but always downward. The women in the palace became obsessed with preservation. Youth in the harem wasn't just prized, it was required. Wrinkles were warnings. A graying hair might as well be a death sentence. Some drank powdered pearls mixed into tea. Others rubbed crushed silkworm cocoons into their faces or bound their waists so tightly they couldn't eat a full bowl of rice. But the most desperate turned to lead paste. It whitened the skin, erased blemishes, turned faces into flawless porcelain masks, and slowly poisoned the body. One night, while applying her face paint, the girl watched another concubine collapse in the mirror's reflection. Blood seeped from her gums. She died before sunrise. The next morning, no one mentioned her name. Just one less flower in the imperial bouquet. Then came the 16th rule, the darkest of them all. When an emperor dies, some concubines must follow. Not by order, not with daggers, with ritual. She heard about it from an older concubine named An. "He's dead," An said one night, "but you're not free. You're expected to prove your love, even after." "How?" the girl whispered. "You write poems about your loyalty. You dress in red, and then—" An gestured across her throat. "It's not forced," she added, "but if you don't do it, everyone will remember." Some concubines drank poison. Others slipped their veins into shallow porcelain bowls. A few walked into the fire of the emperor's funeral pyre themselves. And those who didn't lived as ghosts. The girl once read a letter left behind by a concubine who chose death. "I do not do this for him. I do this so my brothers may marry well, so my father may die honored, so my name does not become a curse in my village." It was signed with a flower. No name, no title. Just a trace of perfume pressed into the paper. But not all bowed. Some resisted. Not with swords, but with secrets. One concubine, Yue, taught the other girls how to mix non-toxic substitutes for lead paint. She passed recipes for rice water tonics and honey salves under the guise of embroidery patterns. Another, hidden behind the anonymity of her mask, began writing coded poetry, lines that mocked the emperor, disguised as praises. The girl herself began to train new concubines, not in rules, but in survival. "Smile," she told them, "but not too brightly. They'll think you're hiding something. Breathe, but never sigh. It sounds too much like mourning. Forget nothing. Just learn to hide it better." Some girls broke, others hardened. A few found something even rare, a quiet kind of power. Then came the 18th rule, the cruelest paradox of all. You are forbidden from loving the emperor, and also forbidden from not loving him. You must act as if your heart belongs to him, but never let it truly belong. You must weep if he grows distant. You must ache when he's sick. You must rejoice at his happiness. And yet, you must not feel any of it too deeply. You must pretend to love him so perfectly that even you start to believe the lie. One concubine went mad trying to strike this balance. She began talking to her reflection as if it were him, begging it to understand why she couldn't love him completely. Another carved his name into her arms,